Who was this Jesus? Was he a guru, the founder of a new religion, a Jewish fanatic? Thanks to scientific research, we have new insights into Jesus' life, into past events, personalities, and cultures. There is one trail which is especially important. It leads directly to his own people, the Jews. They give important hints as to who Jesus really was. Here, Jesus was born and grew up. Here he worked and taught. The Jews are Yeshua's family, his people. And the Jews play a key role in understanding Jesus, because Jewish traditions have remained almost unchanged through the centuries. They've been handed down from generation to generation. When Jesus was born, they called him by the Hebrew name Yeshua. In the Bible, names hold tremendous significance. Yeshua means salvation. Jesus was the firstborn son, and he was not the only child. The Bible tells us that Jesus later had brothers and sisters. Who was his family? Who were his brothers and sisters, his parents, his people? What role did they play in his life? An important tradition in a Jewish family is the Brit Milah, the ritual of circumcision. The New Testament recounts that Yeshua was circumcised on the 8th day after his birth, just like this modern Jewish infant. This tradition goes back to Abraham. And for the Jews, it is a sign for the covenant of Israel with God. What can be said with certainty about Yeshua's childhood? Did he go to school? At the time of Jesus, the Jews had already established a well-organized school system, and it still exists until today. It's known as the cheder, a classroom something like a primary school where the teacher is a rabbi. How did Jesus get to know the scriptures of his people? The father, and even here the grandfather with his grandchild, have to make sure that the children learn to read the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. Here the boy repeats the ancient creed. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one God. The father also teaches his son to put on the tefillin. They remind the Jews of the scriptures and are strapped on the forehead and arm with leather. Yeshua himself would likely have worn these devices to demonstrate the importance of God's word. These young Jewish men are instructed by a rabbi how to read the holy book. The life of a religious Jew revolves around reading, meditation, and discussion of the books of the Bible. That's why the Jews are called the people of the book, and it was this book that influenced Yeshua's life the most. To the people of Israel, such Torah scrolls are very important. They are placed in the center of a religious ceremony. Jesus also spoke very often about the meaning of the Torah. He was convinced that people don't only need material things, but rather the words of God. Like him, many Jews consider the Torah a great gift from God, and they express their thankfulness by dancing with the scrolls. Jerusalem. Today, Jews from all over the world go up to the Old City. Here they celebrate a special family feast with their sons, a bar mitzvah, meaning son of the covenant. This is a public confirmation of a young man's faith at the age of 13. At his bar mitzvah, he is entitled to make his free choice in matters of faith. The New Testament records that when the young man Yeshua was visiting the temple, he talked to a group of learned and wise men, and all who heard him were astonished at his understanding as well as his answers. He had come of age. Was this his bar mitzvah? We don't know. The Bible doesn't give any clues. All we know is that he lived a normal life like any other Jewish young man. Students in a Torah school, or in Hebrew, yeshiva, a Jewish institution whose roots go back to the time of Jesus. The word yeshiva means sitting, and while sitting, the students read the scriptures and discuss their contents with each other or the rabbi. Two students would study together, ask each other questions, and discuss them. The rabbi would intervene if the young men had to solve a difficult problem. At the time of Jesus, it was common for rabbis to gather a group of students around them. Often they traveled through the country and spent much time together. The mutual life took place in a close fellowship. Together with his rabbi, the student learned how to apply the spiritual principles to the specific situations of everyday life. The New Testament records that Jesus was a rabbi and that he gathered a group of students around him. Rabbi was not necessarily an academic title. Any layman could be a rabbi if he possessed the necessary spiritual authority and qualities of a leader and a deep understanding of the Torah. Most of the rabbis were married, and it was not uncommon for them to earn a living with a secular job, such as carpentry. That's exactly what Yeshua did. He learned the family trade of carpentry from his father Joseph. Here, an Arab carpenter in Nazareth carries on that very tradition. Yeshua knew how to make furniture, doors, staircases. He knew how to make a living. While Jesus prepared for his later ministry to preach and to heal, here he was a member of the community like any other young Jewish man. He was part of the family of Joseph. He lived a normal, everyday life like thousands of other people. But could such a young man also be the Son of God? That's the question people have asked then and ask today. The New Testament makes it clear. The Son of God shared his life with people from first-hand experience. He understands their sorrows, their everyday problems. Yeshua demonstrated that God is not a distant God, that God is interested in the everyday life of people, and he wants to be in the midst of it. The Sea of Galilee, fishermen going about their daily work. Jesus spent a lot of time with the Galilean fishermen at the lake. He liked these people. Some of them even became his disciples. It's this kind of people you encounter when you visit the lake. Yeshua accompanied his disciples on their fishing trips. He shared his life with them. He experienced hard work and storms. But his vision for them was that they should not only catch fish, but real people through love. Yeshua sought down-to-earth people, He gravitated toward the poor and the social outcasts. The uneducated, tax collectors and criminals were his table companions. To them he entrusted the gospel, the good news that God is here for all people, not for the self-righteous, but for all, even people with mistakes and weaknesses. Yeshua is here on earth for the people who have lost sight of God and who they are. He's here for people who are sick in their bodies and soul, who know they cannot help themselves. With these disciples, he started a movement, the original Jesus movement, that has spread throughout the world. Father and son build a sukkah, a tabernacle. This temporary booth, both for eating and sleeping, is constructed each autumn during the Feast of Tabernacles to remind the Jews of their wilderness experience of 40 years sojourning in tents. It was only natural that Yeshua celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles with his family. He was part of the celebration. He was eating and singing with his brothers and sisters, and also sleeping in the sukkah, probably a very special experience and adventure. Similar to Israel's sojourn through the desert, some Israeli Bedouin live in their tents until today, but most of them have settled down, living in a house. Journeying through the desert still holds a fascination in the consciousness of the Jewish people. It's the story of their deliverance. The people of Israel lived as slaves in a foreign land until their leader Moses brought them out of Egypt with God's help. For the Jews, God is the one who delivered them from bondage. Yeshua was told this impressive story every year. And thanks to the Feast of Tabernacles, the memory of this event doesn't get lost. The New Testament records that Jesus also went to the desert to fast and pray. He stayed here for 40 days and nights. He was totally isolated from family and friends and faced hunger and thirst. Here he experienced what most human beings experience, loneliness and separation. But he learned to overcome in these difficult circumstances and still trust in God. The New Testament talks about a wedding Jesus was invited to. How was it celebrated in his time? The evening before the big feast, the bridegroom went together with his friends to the house of the bride. They would take her to the bridegroom's home in a big procession. The night was spent singing and dancing. On the following day in the evening, the wedding ceremony took place. Until today, the celebrations, such as this Yemenite Jewish wedding, are similar to those in Jesus' time. It was during a wedding that Yeshua made wine from water. For some, that doesn't fit into the picture they have of the man from Nazareth. But everything Jesus does and says confirms one thing: God is not a spoilsport, as many perceive him. The New Testament reports that Yeshua said, "I have come that you may have life abundantly." A Jewish family at the Passover meal. To understand the ministry and work of Jesus, you have to understand the background of Passover, or Pesach, as it's known in Hebrew. The Pesach supper is more than a meal. It's a special ceremony with a liturgy. The celebration aims especially to educate the children. In turns, they read from the Seder book containing all the instructions to celebrate the feast. They eat the food that alludes to the events of the Exodus from Egypt. The father leads the celebration. It's the father's task to convey the story of the Exodus, of Israel's liberation from slavery. He does this very skillfully in a responsory song with questions and answers. Jesus celebrated Passover with his disciples. He ate with them the lamb, the bitter herbs, and the unleavened bread. Later on during the supper, Yeshua took the bread and the wine and gave it to his disciples and asked them to remember him. At the Passover table, Yeshua instituted what Christians call the Lord's Supper, Holy Communion. This symbolic meal is celebrated by Christians all over the world to commemorate Jesus. What happened in the final dramatic days of Jesus' ministry on earth? The New Testament recounts that his mere presence, his teachings, his criticism of the religious hypocrites, his disputes with the learned men were a challenge to the establishment. He was accused of blasphemy because he claimed to be the Son of God. An overnight plot was hatched to be rid of him. He was sentenced to death by the Romans and killed on a cross. How did Yeshua's story continue? According to the Bible, they laid him in a tomb near the old city. Three days later, it was early morning. The New Testament reports that Yeshua's disciples came early on the first day after the Shabbat to the tomb. In fact, the first to come were some Jewish women. They were astonished to find the tomb empty. Slowly, Yeshua's followers began to understand what had happened, and they recognized the truth which is still characterizing the faith of those who believe in Yeshua. He is not dead, he is risen. Death didn't have the last word. And the story continues beyond the resurrection. The New Testament recounts that Yeshua appeared to a number of people, at one time even up to 500. Many Jews believed in him. In Jerusalem, several thousand. And with these Jewish believers began a movement that spread across the whole world and still exists today. Who was Jesus? No doubt, Jesus was a Jew. He grew up in the Jewish culture. He was a rabbi who taught the people how to cope with the problems of life. And he also maintained that he was the Son of God, the only way to God. With this claim, he divided his contemporaries. There were those who followed him and those who denied his claims. He also said, "Whoever believes in me shall live forever." With this statement, Yeshua not only challenged the people 2,000 years ago, but he also challenges us today. Every one of us must face the question, who really is this Jesus?